So I just want to welcome everybody. It is my privilege to have Leif Gregerson, and he is an incredible person who I've heard about for many years, and but I wasn't sure how to approach him until a friend of mine introduced me to the Krez Foundation. And he is one of the survivors on the Krez Foundation, and I'll send that information out to everybody as well. And it is an incredible organization that was started by Bethany Yiser, who had schizophrenia and wrote a book and is in charge of this organization that does great work for people with schizophrenia and bipolar and other mental health disorders. And they have excellent lectures, but Leif is also on their speakers bureau. And I was very lucky to find that I could get him. So welcome, Leif. And Leif is a blogger, a mental health advocate, and a writer. And he's written many, many books. I think, was it 13 books, I believe?
Yep, 13
And
books.
And he has writing samples and poems on his blog, which he's an excellent writer on the edmontonwriter.com, which I'll send you. And one of his most interesting books is called Inching Back to Sane, a memoir of mental health illness. And it's the second edition. He's also a speaker he works for the Schizophrenia Society of Edmonton. And he has had many interviews on CBC and with other mental health blog experts and in the community. So welcome, Leif. How are you today?
I'm doing really good. Thank you. It's nice to see everybody out.
Leif, I just wanted to ask, how was your childhood when you were growing up? Was there any kinds of mental health issues?
Well, in many ways, I had a wonderful childhood. Thinking back, my dad was an incredible human being. He could do so many things. One of the things I remember him doing was he built us a kid-sized airplane out of wood, and he pushed us around the yard in it, making airplane sounds. And then I have these recollections of doing things like I had this little child-sized chair, and I would sit beside his recliner, and we would eat crackers and ham, sausage, and we would play chess and stuff like that. But there were times in my childhood when I had difficulties with my mental health. I can remember being very young and just this one moment, and there weren't a lot of moments like this, but there was one moment that stands out. Um, I had this favorite TV show. I don't know if anybody remembers it, The $6 Million Man. And he was an astronaut who had been in an accident, and they replaced him with robotic parts, and he worked for, I guess, the CIA or something like that. So even though I was a young kid, I had a concept of secret organizations. And I remember having this sort of a delusion that my parents had been replaced with other people, and that this secret organization was filming me through the walls. Sort of like in the Truman Show, if anybody's ever seen that. That was
Mhm.
actually a movie about schizophrenia. But the schizophrenia didn't really count. That was the one incident where I remember having delusional thoughts as a young child. But what was really prevalent was when I was in elementary school. I was active. I was in I was in advanced classes for children who were gifted. Um, I played sports. I played football. I played basketball. I played volleyball. Um, I had a fair number of friends, and I really enjoyed elementary school, but I went through some pretty severe depressions. And one of the things my dad talked about in a book where I had him write, my dad has passed on now. But my dad talked about in this introduction to a book I wrote, Alert and Oriented times three. about how he had to always seem to coax me out of these depressions. And funny enough, one of the ways he would do this would be to take me on long drives. And it seemed that long drives would sort of lift me out. And sometimes I wonder if the negative experiences I had at school, I had some bullies. I had a hard time making friends, different things like that. I wonder if just getting away from all that and getting to a new situation would help me just feel happier. Um, but what really got difficult was when I got into junior high, and all of a sudden school wasn't fun anymore, and school was demanding, and the pressure from bullies and from making friends and everything was really bad. And so my first year junior high was very hard. I hated it. I wanted to go back to elementary school. Um, but then I went into air cadets, and air cadets was something that in grade 8 I went into air cadets, and air cadets was something that really just changed my whole life. And it inspired me to work harder in school. It inspired me to have friends. I Everything had just changed. And it was funny because a lot of people were in air cadets for the social aspect of it, but I was in there because I loved the military aspect of it. And after a while, I started to obsess over the military aspect of it. And it ended up where my parents realized that, we can't go on any longer. We have to get our son some psychiatric help.
I just
And
want to stop you there because
oh, sure.
I'm going to go back a little bit. So,
Okay.
because I know you've had an interesting and difficult childhood, so I'm just going to go back a little bit further.
Mhm.
Um, you had a mother who suffered from a long time depression.
Yeah.
How was that? Do you think is it genetic that you have a
Well,
diagnosis with
I'm
schizophrenia, a schizoaffective?
I'm positive there was a genetic component. There was as far back as my great grandmother, there was evidence of schizophrenia. Um, in my uncle and my aunt, my mom's brother and sister, there was severe depression. Um, Towards the end of my mom's life, I started to suspect that she had symptoms of schizophrenia because she would talk about um, seeing visions and things like that. But growing up with a parent who had a mental illness was very difficult. She was unable to function in many ways as a normal mother would. Sometimes we wouldn't get laundry done, sometimes things like that. My dad did everything he could. But I think there's one thing that's important is that even though my mom had difficulties, I loved her to the moon and back. I just She was absolutely my whole world, and she was still an incredible person with her depression and everything. And but there were times, I mean, it was very hard because back in the late 70s, early 80s, if you had to get a medication change, you had to go to the hospital for months at a time. And it was very difficult having to load up into the car and drive all the way into the city and visit my mom in the hospital and to see her going through that.
And
But like,
you were quite young, I think around 10, when your mom tried to attempted suicide. And so
yeah,
that must have been quite challenging for you.
yeah. I don't know if I completely understood it. Um, I just remember coming home from school and there being an ambulance in our backyard, and yeah, and then my dad just saying that, your mom's in the hospital, um, and sort of taking over things, and you know, taking on the role of being the breadwinner and the caregiver and all that stuff. And yeah, so in some ways I see I was harder on my dad than me. But the amazing thing was that as my parents got older, um, it didn't matter to my dad that my mom had mental health issues. He was a very good, very caring man. And I just have this one image of I stayed over at their home one night, and I remember I was going to go and ask them something, and I kind of peeked in their bedroom door, and here was my dad reading a book out loud to my mom, and my mom was holding my dad like a teddy bear. And I just thought it was the most beautiful thing in the world. And yeah, so mental illness doesn't mean that love doesn't exist. It doesn't mean that life can't be good. And yeah.
So we were talking earlier, and I remember you saying that you were looking when you look back at your school pictures as early as age 9, you could see depression written all over your face.
Yeah, that was I don't know, age 9, it was just a very difficult time. It was funny. I remember um the family would be watching TV, and I was very sensitive to what was on TV and everything, and sometimes things would embarrass me so much I would put a pillow over my head and hide from watching the TV and everything. And but yeah, I just one of the worst things that I think that was going on was, even though there was a lot of things I really liked about school and I did well in school, um, I remember having these times when, like on a Sunday night, when I knew I had to go back to school the next day, and no longer have that family time and the fun time with my toys and all that stuff and my brother. Um, I would literally cry my eyes out, not wanting to go back to school the next day. Um, but towards high school, I actually started to really love school, and I wanted nothing more than to be in school and to accomplish that. And but that was the time when my illness started to take over, and it became almost impossible to finish school.
Well, you told me that at age 12, you heard your name, and you were in an empty house and there was no one present. And that was the
Yeah.
first time your auditory hallucination started. And then over the next few years, it seemed that voices kind of got worse.
Yeah, well, that was an interesting thing. When I was in Air Cadets at age 12, we would go to these weekend camps, and they were just an absolute blast. And we'd be running around in army uniforms and having fun. And most of the time, we didn't get any sleep the whole weekend. And usually, the weekend is the time when a kid catches up on sleep. But we were just having so much fun, we didn't sleep. And then I would remember I'd get home, and then I'd be alone, and I would hear my name, like from behind me and stuff like that. It was really strange. Um, and then when I started to get some sleep, it would go away. But it actually didn't. It was usually just when I was very, very tired. But later on in life, when I started to succumb to schizophrenia, or symptoms of schizophrenia, I would hear voices, and they wouldn't go away with sleep. There wasn't anything I could do about them until I was medicated.
And you said that your hallucinations started and they got worse, and you began to experience mood swings. And it just kind of, you felt very high, as if you abused drugs. So that would probably be a manic state, perhaps.
Yeah. Well, I didn't abuse drugs too much. I did try drugs a couple times. My brother abused drugs, and he sort of convinced me to try them with him a couple times. It wasn't many times, I think 4 or 5 times throughout my whole teen years. But with my depression, I remember just feeling horrible all the time. And it seemed the only thing that would lift me out of depression was alcohol. And I would have a few drinks, and it would sort of shoot me into that high, that mania. and that was something that really drove people away from me. People didn't want to be around me when I was drunk. You know, I'd get very aggressive or very animated, and yeah, it caused quite a bit of problems. It cost me friendships.
You know, when you were diagnosed, I remember you saying that the doctor started you on medication for sleep. And once you were discharged, um, you used your willpower to defeat, you thought you would defeat mental illness and you threw out all your medications, which is, you know, happens quite a bit. But
Yeah.
so you had a bit of anorexia, I believe, at that
Oh,
point.
definitely. Yeah. Well, I remember, the funny thing was that I was very ill when I first went into the hospital, and there was a couple of times where I went to the hospital for a short time, and they didn't know what was going on, and they wanted me to stay and get voluntary treatment. But I was adamant that I had to go back to school, and I ended up getting in a very serious altercation at school where I picked a fight, and I was arrested in school at a later point, and I sort of fought with the police officers, and I was really fortunate they didn't charge me with anything like assault or resisting arrest or anything like that. They just took me to the psychiatric hospital. Being in the psychiatric hospital was a very difficult thing, but somehow, even though I was very closed mouth, I wouldn't talk about what was going on in my head. Um, part of my problem was, excuse me, part of my problem was that I had paranoia that my false delusions were a reality that I couldn't share with authority, and that I would be in big trouble from the people from the sort of subculture my delusion made me believe in. And I thought I'd be in big trouble if I shared anything with authority. And so I didn't talk to my psychiatrist about my voices, my delusions, my thoughts. But somehow they were able, by watching my behavior, to find the right medication. I was put on a number of different medications, one of them being lithium. I think another one was Haldol. Um, I left the hospital, and I I somehow thought that it was just like life situations, even though when I left the hospital, I had stopped believing in all these things, and I was so much better and I felt so much better. Um, but one of the things that happened was I thought, okay, well, I'm just gonna look on the bright side of leaving the hospital and being kicked out of school, and look on the bright side and just get a full-time job, and I'll have some extra spending money, and I'll, maybe buy a car or whatever. And so I got a job in a factory, and I had worked in this factory before, and I did well there, made some money, and but this time when I got the job in the factory, they fired me after just 3 days, saying that I couldn't keep up with the work. And I knew it was the medication that was slowing me down. And I felt so conflicted because of that, and I stopped the medication. And then I kind of made an unfortunate decision. I thought that with my illness, with my voices, with all those things, delusions, I thought I just needed discipline to keep those under control. And so, looking back to my air cadet days when I had discipline in my life, I thought if I joined the military, that I would have that discipline, and I would, be able to overcome my illness in that way. And it was completely wrong. And I was actually, well, I applied for the military and I passed all the tests. And then I remember them asking this list of questions, and they got to this one question: have you ever seen a psychiatrist or a psychologist? And I said, well, yeah, I was in Alberta Hospital for whatever time. And they just closed the book, and they said, well, until we get a full report from that psychiatrist, you can't join the military. And I got the report, and it had said that I had been on lithium, and they said that if you've ever been on lithium, you cannot join the military in Canada. And so I was just devastated. And I had really looked forward to the idea of having a military career and all that stuff. And but it was probably for the best, because if I had gone ahead and gone into the military and later had a nervous breakdown or a mental collapse, um, I probably would have been in a lot of trouble.
Now that you are on the right medication, you're living a very full life and you call yourself a survivor. Um, do you remember when you had psychosis and when you had your um, delusions, and can remember what you were doing at that time? Because some people say they have vivid memories, but they couldn't do anything about it because, the psychosis or delusions were in control.
Yeah. Well, that's where what my that's I wrote a book called Alert and Oriented times three. It's my second most recent book. And actually, if you visit my website, edmontonwriter.com, um, you scroll down a bit and there's a picture of London's Tower Bridge. You click on that photo and it'll take you to a page where you can get a free download of this book, Alert and Oriented times three. This was a really big learning experience for me, because what had happened was, this was about maybe 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. I went to my doctor and he said, I have some good news for you. There's a new medication. It's going to work better. You need it less. It's going to have less side effects. And he put me on it, and it didn't have any effect on my psychosis. And at the time, I sort of wasn't sure, after you take medication for years, sometimes you get a little complacent. You start to think, well, maybe I don't have a mental illness, different things. But like, I got switched to this medication, and all of a sudden my psychosis came back in full force. And I ended up having to spend 5 weeks in the hospital. And so this was a big learning experience. I have a lot of vivid memories. One of the ones I remember was actually on Christmas. Well, I was having delusions that all my neighbors could hear everything I could do, like from a breathing to whispering to everything, and opening cupboards and cooking things, and that they were getting angrier and angrier at me. And I actually spent Christmas hidden in my bedroom with a blanket over my head, eating out of tuna cans and ham cans and things on crackers. Uh, I put my TV in there and my video game, and I was hiding and in my own apartment. And I had delusions that my neighbors had come to my door and were making threats and saying I had to move out of the province. And eventually, my dad had me over at his place, and he saw how bad I was, and he intervened and had me taken to the hospital. Um, but yeah, I do I have a recent vivid memory of psychosis, and it's a horrible thing. It really takes over. And probably one of the worst parts of it is that um there is that anosognosia. I mean, it tricks you into thinking that these things are really happening, and it seems so realistic, and you don't realize you're ill. But yeah.
I know one of the speakers that we've had in the past, he had catatonia, and he stood there for 4 or 5 days and he couldn't
Mm,
move. And I remember he said to his parents, like they would talk to him, he wouldn't talk, he wouldn't eat, he couldn't go to the washroom. And afterwards, when he had gone on the right medication, he said, I was there. I was crying for help, but no one could hear me. They were controlling me, my whole body. And I just couldn't fight it.
yeah, that's
It must
terrible.
be very scary going through that.
Well, I've never gone through catatonia,
No,
but
but even, being,
yeah,
in your room and thinking,
yeah,
yeah. I
it
wanted to
was.
ask, when you, I guess during your 4 years that you experienced deep depression and
Mhm.
mania, um, I know that you left the province and that you were traveling and trying to chase lost dreams, and you had dreams of becoming a pilot and moving in and out of different places. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, after I sort of lost the chance of joining the Canadian military, I had the idea that I could go to Vancouver and reapply and lie about the fact that I had seen a psychiatrist and get in. But I'm pretty sure they had computer records and everything that would have revealed that. And so I put off doing that, and I sort of just enjoyed the life of working construction and different things in Vancouver, and having friends and enjoying myself, and it was actually quite a good life. But I got sick again, came back, and then I contacted somebody I had known. So I was living on my own in Edmonton, and then I contacted somebody I had known in Vancouver, and they invited me to come out. And unfortunately, they believed that they had been through a serious family situation. They had mental health issues as a result, but they believed that they could help me through my mental health uh, situation. And so I went out, and I was sort of, I guess I was a little manic. Um, I did different things. I applied for a student loan to go to commercial pilot school. Um, that was a very exciting time because I really thought I could do it. I did well with the lessons I took, and it seemed like I could go through it, but I never would have passed the medical. And at one point, I met this guy. He was a bit of a con artist. He was from California, and he had me convinced that if I went with him, that he could set me up and that his family was well off, and all that stuff. And I ended up traveling with him down to California, and we sort of bounced around through Washington and Portland and stuff like that. And then we got down to LA. And when we got down to his hometown of Hemet, California, he just took off. And basically, I had nothing, and I ended up having to hitchhike back to Canada with no money, no food, nothing. And it just the biggest thing I think about was just the terrible situation I left my parents in. Having, just all of a sudden one day they get this collect call that, I'm stuck in California. I have no money, no food. I've been ripped off. I've got this mental health issue and everything. And my dad, when I told my dad about the things this con artist had told me, he said, "Well, why don't you just go into the hospital?" And I actually was angry with him, and I felt that he was trying to control me. I felt that he was trying to I felt that he had the agenda that I had to be in the hospital for the rest of my life. And that was scary. And I didn't want somebody sort of actively trying to get me hospitalized. But the truth was, if it when I got hospitalized, I would get so much better, and then I would do so much better on medication. Eventually, I got back to Edmonton, and not Edmonton, but I got back to Vancouver. And after a little while, I don't know what what caused it, but I got very ill again. I went into psychosis, and there was this period where um, basically I went to sleep. I had a really, really bad dream, and I was ill. And when I woke up, I actually thought that it was possible the dream was real. And I went for a walk to clear my head. And as I was walking, I had so many delusions. I was thinking that I had traveled forward in time, that I was a robot, that I had been tricked, and I was now in the future in Vancouver, and I wasn't in Vancouver, but a replica of Vancouver and the moon designed to fool me. Just preposterous delusions. And part of me really wanted to get help, and I didn't know how to get it. I didn't know where to go or who to talk to. what I ended up doing was I called 911, and I was so ashamed of having an illness that I told the police that I thought somebody had put hallucinogenic drugs in my food. And that was the lie that would get me out of the blame of having an illness. And they took me to the hospital, and I spent some time in the hospital in Vancouver. And then I left and I went back to Edmonton. And that was the point where I just decided that I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't live without medication. I needed treatment. I wanted my family back. I wanted all these things. And so
How old were you then?
at the time I was 19. Actually, no, I had just turned 20. And and it was actually interesting. So that was the point where the book Inching Back to Sane, second edition, began, where I admitted that I had an illness and that I needed help. And it was a very difficult road. And there were some times like I would go on medications, I would go off medications, but I did my best. And it took some years, but life really improved for me. And yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, is there anyone else in your family besides your mom that had and yourself that had mental health issues as well?
Um, yeah, well, my brother has some quite serious issues. He hasn't disclosed his records to me or anything like that. Um, all I know is he was on clozapine, and clozapine is sort of reserved for people with treatment-resistant schizophrenia.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually had thought he had bipolar disorder or something. He had said bipolar disorder, uh, but there's a good chance he has schizophrenia. And he has a very hard time. He has some issues of hypochondria and stuff like that. And yeah, so it's gone through. Um, the other thing on my mother's side of the family, it's very prevalent. I have a cousin who takes medication. Um, I think he has bipolar disorder, and his brother, my other cousin, takes medication for depression. So yeah, so it's a big thing in my family.
And I know that you really help out your brother quite a bit,
I
and
try to, yeah.
which is great because family is the main support of most people,
Hmm.
and or hopefully they can be involved.
Yeah.
Not all families can be involved with their family members with mental illness, but I'm glad that your family, have supported each other.
Yeah. Well, one thing I do know is that in the experience of working with cures and stuff like that, it seems the people that do the best are the ones that really have parents advocating for them. And parents have such a hard time sometimes not being able to get through to their kids, or their kids ending up resenting them as I did for a short time, but I didn't always resent my dad. But their kids resenting them for getting them into hospital. But without that, I just don't know what the person would do. There was something my dad did that was really essential. And about 20 years ago, I had a very serious breakdown. I had to go to the hospital for 6 months, and it was just a very difficult time. When I got out, I eventually ended up in a group home, but my dad didn't stop caring and he didn't stop helping. He would drive to my group home every day, pick me up, and he would take me for a walk in the river valley of Edmonton, which is really beautiful. And we did this for months and months, and just that exercise, that companionship, the fresh air, all that stuff. It really allowed me a time when I was able to heal and grow and everything. And yeah, it was essential. It was amazing.
Well, that's great that you had such great family support, and for those people who, I have a number of people right now that are trying to um, get their family member help. And there's one person, his name is Andrew, his mother lives in PEI, and he has been in Ontario for 9 months,
Mm,
trying to be hospitalized. And unfortunately, it hasn't worked. And he's, very psychotic at this point, and they're really having trouble getting him the right care. So
yeah.
you were very lucky to be able to get the hospitalization and the care that you need. How many times have you been hospitalized?
I would say at least probably about 10 times.
Oh, so from what, 15 to now, or
Yeah, 14 until my last hospitalization was I spent 5 weeks at a hospital called the Grey Nuns, which was a result of that medication change a few years back that I wrote the book about.
were you involuntary or voluntary when you went in the hospital? Did they do a
Um,
form too, or did the police have to come? Because I know that having the police from people that I've talked to, it's a very scary and very uncomfortable feeling, and that they wish that they didn't have to be handcuffed,
well,
and
that
they
was the
found it
kind of
traumatic.
yeah, that was the kind of funny thing is because I have a very good relationship with the police because I work for the Schizophrenia Society, and one of the things I do through them is I go to the city police recruit class, and I talk to them just like I'm talking to you now, and I tell my story and everything, and they answer questions and things like that. And so I'm actually fairly well known by the police. So the funny thing was, I was more worried about my delusional enemies than I was about the police. And when they came, I was actually had a good rapport with them. And but I still wanted to go to the hospital, and the paramedics were really good. What ended up happening was this is from the last time when I had the medication change that put me into psychosis. Uh, they took me to the hospital, and I had a number of delusional thoughts and hallucinations. And one of the things that was most disturbing was that um, I was sitting waiting, and somebody walked in, and they were talking to the triage nurse, and I'm pretty sure this was 100% hallucination, but he seemed to talk at length about a brutal murder that had happened and how horrible it was and all these grisly details. And I believed that I was a suspect in this murder. And I got a little agitated, and they ended up putting me in into a locked room. And then I went to the locked ward of the Grey Nuns, and I was able to go around the ward, but I wasn't allowed a cell phone, and I wasn't allowed to leave at all. Um, when I did get a chance to go to the hospital gift shop, I bought a notepad, and then when I was in my room, I was writing these short poems. And if anyone gets a chance to read this book, Alert and Oriented times three, they'll see those short poems exactly as I wrote them by hand in the book. And I wrote commentary to go with them to show the state of mind. And yeah, it's kind of an interesting way to have a look into the mind of someone who's very ill.
Okay, that's that. I would like to read that. That sounds very interesting.
Great.
Um, what medication are you on now?
I take a few medications. Every 2 weeks I get an injection. I think it's called Fluanxol. It might be Clopixol. I've had like one of two different ones. Both of them are older medications, but they work really well for me. They cause some side effects, but they deal with my psychosis, and I'm really fortunate that my medication deals with almost all of my psychosis. I also take a mood stabilizer called Depakote, which is also known as Depakote, and it goes by a couple of different names. Um, It has some side effects. It causes my hands to shake. It can cause diarrhea, quite severe diarrhea, which I take extra pills for. Um, the Depicane is a mood stabilizer, and that sort of deals with my bipolar symptoms. I still have quite severe depression, and for that I take a medication called Prozac or fluoxetine. And the Prozac is really just a miraculous thing. I mean, I'm so lucky that my medications deal with my symptoms, and the Prozac is one of the best ones because uh, I just have crippling depression if I don't take it.
And I'm so thrilled for you that your medication works and that you're able to live a wonderful life, and we'll get to that, volunteering and working and writing and your blog, which is amazing. So we'll get back to that in a minute. But I understand that you just said that when you had your, I guess it was around 30, I think you said,
Yeah,
you had deep psychosis and was sent to we were in the hospital for 6 long months.
yeah.
And then during that extended hospitalization, that you really decided that you wanted to change your life, and that you couldn't go on the roller coaster of going in and out of the hospital, in and out of jobs, and you became serious about your medications, taking it. You wanted to become compliant. You wanted to go to all your appointments, and you really start to listen to your treatment team. And you
Mhm.
also saw a therapist regularly. So were you on an ACT team, and did you have on a CTO or community treatment order?
I didn't
Did
have a
you,
community treatment order. I think one of the most essential things was that I eventually ended up at a really good group home. And this was a group home run by the Edmonton City Center Church Corporation. They also call themselves the E4C. And they it made such a difference because one of the big initial things was that I'm put into this group home, and everybody else either had a mental illness themselves or were trained to deal with a mental illness, the staff members. And so all of a sudden, right away, I'm living and there's no stigma. There's nobody's judging me, nobody's looking down on me. And then I was able to make friends and have companionships and all that stuff. And of course my dad was helping too. But not only did not only was I given regular meals, regular medications, it was so essential. Like before I went in the hospital for that 6 months period, um, I had lowered my medications without doctor's consent, and that caused a lot of problems. Um, one of the things was that when I went into the group home, I would take my medications at the times and whatever suggested, like at 9 p.m. and at 8 a.m., rather than taking them whenever I went to sleep or whenever I woke up. And when I would take them whenever I went to sleep and whenever I woke up, I wasn't getting them in a regular sense, and my mental health was poor. And the other thing was before that 6 month stay, I was living alone, and that was just horrible for me. I was just living a terrible life in a not very clean apartment and a very tiny apartment. And I just sunk into depression and sunk into isolation and things like that. And that was what precluded me lowering my medications and all that stuff. And so the group home gave me regular medications. They made sure I went to my appointments. They even had a sports program where they would take us out and we'd play soccer or volleyball or different things like that. And so all of a sudden I had a very, very full life and I had proper treatment. There was no community treatment order. Um, but basically a condition of me living at the group home was that I comply with all of my treatment. And they knew if I was taking my medications and stuff like that.
So did
And
they, I wanted to ask, so did they
yeah,
provide you, meals,
yeah,
did
meals
the
were
social worker
included.
come and check up on you? Did they watch you take your medications?
Yeah, well, I was in something they called a satellite house where it was just a house with no supervision, but for meals we had to go to a main house, and then they would basically when we went for meals we would take turns making meals, which was really beneficial because it taught me a lot of new things to cook. Um, Another thing was that many of the people who worked there were trained in social work or training in social work, and yeah, it was just they would converse with us. They would make sure we were good, like yeah, it was amazing.
And did they provide you with a psychiatrist or you had one from the community?
In Edmonton, we have a clinic. They call it the 108th Street Clinic. It's a high rise, and a number of floors of it are dedicated to mental health care. And they had basically I would go there every 2 weeks, and I would see a nurse therapist. Well, for the first while, I would see a social worker, and he would get a nurse therapist to give me my injection every 2 weeks. And so I had the counseling that was going really well. And then they had the psychiatrist there, and that would be a little less frequently. The good thing was that my psychiatrist was absolutely amazing. Um, I like to say he was a friend, but he, I really admired the man, and I just thought he was incredible, wonderfully intelligent, all that stuff. But yeah, he really put me to task, and one of the big things, like this may sound irrelevant, but one of the things was he was very against smoking. He had been a smoker himself and had quit, and he basically hounded me until I quit smoking, and it was one of the best things I had ever done. And now I've been smoke free for I think about 19 years, and the amount of money I saved is one thing, but the fact that I'm still alive and I haven't succumbed to a smoking related illness is pretty amazing. And that's one of the things about schizophrenia. Like something like half of all cigarettes are sold to people with mental illnesses, and it some nicotine and some of the chemicals in cigarettes actually affect some of the same neurotransmitters that psychiatric medications do. And smoking is a major problem with people who are mentally ill. And my doctor would say things like, "Well, I can't treat someone if they're in the graveyard." And yeah, so that was a really good thing. And when it was time for me to quit smoking, the clinic actually had a program where I saw psychiatrists who specialized in addictions. I saw a nurse who was a counselor who set up support groups to quit smoking, and I even saw a pharmacist who helped me with using the gum and the patches and everything, and to be able to quit.
Okay, we're all moving out to Edmonton. We don't have anything like that here. So
Yeah,
that's amazing. And
yeah.
um, you're right. If you smoke, vape, or have marijuana or any other drugs, it does affect the efficacy of the medication and
Oh,
will
definitely. Yeah,
not work effectively. And
yeah.
so people, don't know that, unfortunately.
Mm.
And they should be warned, like your psychiatrist did, that, absolutely no smoking, vaping, or drugs, because it does affect the medication. So I'm glad you pointed that out. How many people live in the group home? Like, I think it was quite
Um,
large.
that's the unfortunate thing is because there were I think there were about 25 people living there. But as far as the need for people to live in a group home like that, it's huge. I mean, there's probably hundreds or even thousands just in Edmonton who need a place like that, and there just aren't enough of them. There's another place that run by the Schizophrenia Society called Iris Court, and one of the things about Iris Court is that they house people there, they feed them, they make sure they're, stable, all that. They bring in their medications. The thing is, it costs the government, like I believe they're government funded. It costs them like, I don't know, like 1/4 the price of a day in hospital to house in a person like that. And so it's really cost effective, but it's just there's not enough of it, and it doesn't make any sense because um even with just general homeless people who of course are have a large overrepresentation of people with mental illnesses um among the homeless. um if you leave them out to live on the streets or whatever, you're spending money for temporary shelters, you're spending money for police interventions, for ambulance interventions, all these things, and the cost savings of just giving them a permanent home is just really incredible. Something I feel very strongly about.
That's great. We really don't have many options here. So
Yeah,
you're very lucky. Um, when we're talking about, you decided to get on board and see your therapist and take medication. Um, how did you get into teaching and speaking? And I know with so many people having mental illness that sometimes you're not able to finish high school or go to university. So tell us a little bit about your background and then how you got into teaching and employment and public speaking.
well, as far as university and stuff goes, well, I actually didn't finish high school. I'm like 3 credits short or something like that of 100 credits. I think it's a 30 credit system in Ontario, but in Alberta, it's a 100 credit system, and I'm like a ridiculously small amount of credits from finishing. But there was a program called Humanities 101, and I believe they actually have it in Ontario. And what this is it's a university program where people who don't have the opportunity to go to university can go on and sort of experience the university experience. And it's just like one day a week, you go to this class. um they have bring in lecturers, they have assignments, different things like that. There's not too much pressure. It's free. Usually they feed you, they give you bus tickets so you can get there and back and everything. And so I took 2 courses of this Humanities 101, and I found it very beneficial, but I really took advantage of a lot of the stuff that's available through the local library. Um, for people, there's something ideal for people in my situation called Gale courses, and you go to the library and you can sign up for these for free. And I took a number of courses in writing and publishing, and I even took something in computer programming and grant writing, and just like it's like a college that's free, and it's instructor led, and it's self you do it when you have time basically. And but as far as the teaching goes, I was really fortunate with the E4C because they do a lot of community outreach. And one of the guys that works for the E4C had taken 3 years of a 4-year degree in creative writing, and he taught a class. And I had been writing for years at the time, and I went to the class, and he just decided that I should have been the one teaching the class. And so he showed me how to set up a class and everything, and he had me teach a few of them. And then other opportunities just came my way. As far as the public speaking goes, when I was in Air Cadets, we had a Toastmaster member come in and teach a leadership course in public speaking to the Air Cadet members, and that was great. And then finally, just this past year, I've I rejoined Toastmasters and I joined a club. I actually have a meeting tomorrow night that I'm really looking forward to. And they train you how to do public speaking, and you go through a course and stuff like that. But so there's a lot of different things that sort of piece together for me to do what I do now. And then the Schizophrenia Society is probably my biggest public speaking thing. And they basically they find different classes. It could be high schools, it could be universities, it could be the police recruit class. We've gone to corporations that serve the public and stuff like that. And yeah, just doing a lot of that. That was sort of by accident. I had just contacted the Schizophrenia Society out of a desire to meet more people my age who had my affliction. And they said, well, we have this supportive employment program, and so they actually pay me uh, like minimum wage to give my talks, which is great. And they're very supportive about me bringing my books to the talks and everything, and allow me to sell them there and stuff like that.
And then you also teach a writing course as well, don't you?
Um, Over the summer, I taught two writing courses. One was called Poetry in the Park. That we sort of would go out in the middle of the park and hand out notebooks and snacks and stuff like that, and just in this beautiful environment, uh, experience poetry. I would read poems. I would teach people how to write poems, and we'd share what we wrote. That was great. And then I also had another class at the Edmonton Public Library uh, where I taught just basic creative writing, usually poetry. People were most responsive to that. Um, and I had been teaching through an agency called the Learning Center at Alberta Hospital. And I had 3 classes a week with them over last winter, but that contract ended.
That's fabulous.
Yeah,
How long have you been compliant on medication? Because you're thriving, you're able to do quite a
yeah.
bit of work at this point.
Well, that's a funny thing. I've been compliant on medication for probably 2001, about 22 years, completely compliant. Um, but a few years back when I went into the hospital, I was compliant on medication, but the medication was unfortunately not working for me. And so they switched me back to the old medication, which took some time. And I think I was in the hospital for about 5 weeks at the time.
Well, that's fabulous. And you've done a lot. And I just want to know a little bit more. Um, Besides, while you're working at the Schizophrenia Society, doing public speaking, do you work with clients as well?
I'm a member of the Writers Guild of Alberta and the Writers Union of Canada, and there are times when they fund me to mentor people, and I have mentored. I think it stretches for about maybe I'm not sure 10 hours or something like that, and I'll work with them one on one, and I'll 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 try to share with them everything I know about writing and stuff like that. And a couple of those people have been people with mental health issues, and yeah, so I do work one on one quite often. Well, what often happens, I took this course called the Op-Ed Project, and it taught me how to write opinion articles. And so I keep a close eye on the news, and every time comes on the news that I feel I'd like to comment about, I'll write an article for the Edmonton Journal about it. And the most recent one was I forget the subject of it, but it got published in the Edmonton Journal and the Calgary Herald. And quite often, like I'll allow them to publish my email, and quite often I'll get people contacting me about my articles. And quite a couple of times it's been people who are parents of adult children with mental illnesses. And and then I'll meet them, and I'll I don't really consider working one-on-one. I just meet with them and share what I can, to help them out. And there was another woman who has a son who's very much in denial of his illness, and she's encouraged me to try and call him and contact him. So yeah, so there's a little one-on-one working, and yeah.
Do you consider yourself fortunate that you are, that the medication worked, and also your willingness to comply and to move forward with your life? Some people just get stuck and
Yeah,
they don't know, how to move forward. And some people, with having taken medication over a long period of time, they have cognition issues as well.
I definitely have some cognition issues. I always like to joke that I can remember every lyric to every 80s hit song, but if I could only remember why I got up to go into the kitchen, I'd be a happy man. And I've been taking some supplements for it that have been really helpful: the ginkgo biloba, B complex, omega 3, 6, and 9, stuff like that. And it's definitely been helping with my cognition, but yeah.
You don't take anything like Memetin or some memory enhanced medications that sometimes they
Uh,
give along with the antipsychotics.
I don't take anything prescribed for that sort of stuff, no, for memory drugs or anything like that. But I think I'd like to ask about them because that'd probably be pretty beneficial. But yeah, I do consider myself very fortunate. I sort of have this rule is that if I don't like to waste a single day in my life, And there was even a time when I was on a medication called Tegretol.
Mm.
And one of the side effects, I don't know if everybody experiences this on Tegretol, but when I was on Tegretol, it made me incredibly restless and I just could not sit still. And what I was doing was I would pace around until I got very tired, and then I would force myself to read a short story from this book I had. And I just like I don't like a day to go by without me learning something, reading something, doing something for someone, or yeah.
I think Tegretol from my work in other fields, isn't that for seizures or is it for something
Yeah,
else?
and it's actually Tegretol has been for seizures. They found it had some effects as a mood stabilizer. There's other things that it does too that it's been used for, but it's not a very popular drug because of the way a lot of people feel on it. Um, Depakine is actually also an anti-epileptic. Uh, I don't think I've ever had an epileptic seizure, but I take Depakine and it works well for my bipolar disorder. It was actually a point where I remember I was on Tegretol and I went to my psychiatrist and I just told him I cannot take this medication. Is there anything at all we can try that would be different? And he said, well, there is Depakine, but it's a little bit experimental right now. And he warned me that it can cause hair loss, which fortunately, well, I guess it did cause hair loss, but no, I actually have a full head of hair. I just shave it, but it never caused me hair loss. But it can also cause cataracts. And so he said, you have to be checked every now and then for cataracts. But the Depakine's been a pretty good medication for me, and it is also anti-epileptic.
They also sometimes use lamotrigine. or mood stabilizer as well, I
Yeah,
believe.
I've heard of that. Yeah.
You wrote your first book, Through the Withering Storm. Can you tell us how that came about and what it's about?
I had always wanted to be a writer growing up from a very early age. And as I got older, I started to realize that my first book should be about myself. And that's the topic you're most comfortable with, you know the most about it. And it's actually when I started writing, I sort of had an empty apartment and a typewriter. And that's how long ago it was. Nobody uses typewriters anymore. But I started out, I would just type out like a page of a journal. And then I started writing short stories. And then I started finding that it was easier to write true stories about my own life. And then I started putting them together. And I put these stories together, and I had sort of a complete manuscript for a while. And then I remember I met this young woman in the hospital, and I gave her a copy of my book, and she actually became quite ill, and she thought that I had stolen her story, and I was pretty upset about this. And so just to make sure that nothing is ever going to come of it, I actually sat down, and over the course of 3 weeks, I completely rewrote the whole story, and now it became more in the form closer to the form it is when it was published. And then I made copies of it, and I gave one to a close friend of mine, and I didn't think about it anymore. And a lot of things happened, and I had that 6 months hospitalization. And then I was visiting this old friend of mine, and she just said, "Here." And she handed me this plastic bag. And I said, "Well, what's this?" And she said, "It's your book. You asked me to hold it for you." And if she hadn't have done that, that book would not have existed. And I may have never become a writer. And I took it, and my situations had improved, and I had been working and doing well and making fairly good money. And another friend said, "I know someone who can help you with get your book published." And this was an editor. And so I sent her the book and paid her to edit the book. And that was how the Through the Withering Storm came out. And it took kind of a long process of finding the right way to set it up and everything and to have it published. And but once it did, I kind of started to know how to publish things. And I started writing other books, and I wrote I think the next book I wrote was a short novel. And then I wrote some poetry and everything. And eventually I realized that I'm probably best off writing about mental health. So I wrote Inching Back to Sane. And it was a long process over a number of years, but yeah, eventually I've written 13 books. I just had one. um I'm looking at printing up more copies, but I recently published a um short story collection called Voted Off the Crew. Um, I sort of took it from the idea of Survivor, where somebody does something you don't like and they get voted out in their history. And it was the main story in the book was about a group of friends, and one of them, it was based on some true events, although and sort of the main character made the decision to steal something from one of the other characters.
Mhm.
And yeah, so that was the whole Voted Off the Crew thing. But yeah, so that's how they came about. I just kind of started typing and didn't stop for 20 years.
At Home on the Hill, we have different groups because, people learn to cope in different ways and help them move forward. And we don't have a writing workshop, but we do have art and music. Anything that is creative can be helpful, whether it's exercise, eating well, and being with others, socializing with other people. and we do have a recreation group as well. So I'm pleased to see that, with motivation and being with other people, that, it has helped you move forward with your life.
Hmm.
And I know that you said one quote that you do not consider schizophrenia to be the end of your life. You want to explain?
I just think, a lot of people they initially think it's devastating that, they have this horrible choice of either being very ill or being on medication with all the side effects and everything. But the thing is, the medication makes you well, and you have to give it time. Unfortunately, it can be 6 months, it can be a year. Sometimes you can go 6 months and find out that you need to change medication and start over from scratch. But I think in the overwhelming number of cases of people with schizophrenia, there is a lot of recovery. It can take years, but so many people have a full recovery. They return to school, they return to work, they have a full life, and they have relationships and family and all those things. And yeah, I just don't think it's the end. And I should mention there's a resource. I don't know how much you might have explored this. It's called Living Well with Schizophrenia.
Mhm.
It's run by Lauren Kennedy. She actually used to work in Edmonton here with the Schizophrenia Society. She lives in Edmonton, and so I've met her a couple of times. And she not only has videos that you can watch. Um, it was actually pretty surprising because just recently, she put out a video and she just looked like she was a wreck. And she
Mhm.
said, "I'm in psychosis right now." And then you were actually able to watch her sort of decline, go in the hospital and recover. And and she also has something called a Discord server. And if you write to her, you can get a compassionate. If you write to her and you don't can't afford it, you can get a compassionate membership to this Discord server. I think it's like $5 US a month if you want to just go paid or whatever. But they have a lot of support groups where you can post messages, and they have some online live support groups, not over Zoom, but just over I
The
don't know,
telephone, I
it's
think.
similar to Zoom, but yeah.
Well, I've tried to get on. I'm a member. I've watched her. She's excellent. I've watched all her videos.
Yep,
And I did see that segment where she was in psychosis in the hospital.
yep,
She is married with a child. She has a child, and she's married to her husband who has two children. And she talks about, what everyone thinks, oh, she's great. She's doing fabulous. She's on medication. But she'll talk when she's, you know, um, going for a walk with her child in the carriage and say, "Oh, I hear a voice here. Oh, I see an image here." So she appears to be like Superwoman, and that you think she's leading an absolutely normal life, but she still suffers a little bit from delusions and psychosis.
yep,
Um, and she is on a number of medications, and you know she she looks like she has an incredible life, which she does. She started her home production company and the
yep,
Discord service. Leaf is
yeah,
also part of the Krez Foundation, and he's part of the Survivors series. And so Leaf is on as do you do there's a speakers bureau, and there's we had Michael Brisbane last month, who is on the who's in that series as well. And we saw that he's back to school, he's taking his medication, and he's doing really well. Lauren, who I hope to have on one day. And then there's Bethany Yiser, who started the organization, who was homeless for many years and had she wrote her own book and about her life.
yeah.
And she's
I'm really impressed by Bethany.
You want to tell a little bit about, do you get speaking engagements? Like, how did you get involved with the Perez
Um,
Foundation? Which everyone,
well,
I'm going to send the information because it's an incredible organization.
I just sort of at one point I just did a lot of Googling and cures or cures whatever
Perez,
came up, and I always call it Cure SZ because there used to be a magazine called SZ that was about
yeah.
schizophrenia. But Cures, I'm really impressed by Bethany because her mom also wrote a book, and her mom's book follows the same timeline as her book, and you get to watch what her mom went through, trying to get her help and everything like that, and the different things, the viewpoint of someone as a caregiver helping someone. And I think that that collaboration of the two of them writing a book each is just incredible.
And that's very prestigious for you to be on that survivors panel. As I
I guess
know,
so.
Daniel Laitman just became on the that panel.
Yeah,
And there's, I think, a couple other Canadians that are on the panel, and it really shows that, that people can live a very successful life. And
yeah.
you're working what, part-time now, or you have two
Uh,
different jobs, I believe.
yeah, well, I work for the Schizophrenia Society, and then I guess you could call, if you jumble together all my jobs, I guess you could call it full time. I The big thing I do is freelance journalism, and a lot of it tries to focus around mental health. But I what I do is I subscribe to this mailing list, and I get a list of all the calls for pitches for journalistic articles on Twitter. And so 2 days a week I go through that and I send out my proposals, and I spend a lot of my other time writing. And right now I'm working on an article for the Stanford Social Innovation Review, and that one's quite involved. And I have to call around and get a lot of interviews and stuff, and information. And yeah.
Like I said before, you do not consider schizophrenia to be the end of your life. And you've always advocated with medications and treatment that you have academic ambitions again and a real future ahead of yourself.
Mhm.
And that you really encourage anyone struggling with psychosis to know it can be overcome with
Yeah.
patience, effort, medications, as well as group and one-to-one therapy. And you once said, if you're struggling, reach out to a medical doctor or psychiatrist to be as open as you can about what you are experiencing and get treatment that you need. And with proper care and good treatment team, recovery is possible.
Yeah.
Now, that's ideal, and I'm glad that you got there. But in Toronto or Ontario, we're
Mhm.
having a lot of problems getting the right
Mhm.
medication, the right care, therapy, um, and people are struggling, and
Yeah.
they're having medication, but I wouldn't say that their psychosis is managed somewhat, but not. It's not. They still have a lot of symptoms, um, which is unfortunate. So,
Yeah.
what would you tell families? How do you get your family member to believe that if they have an exonosia, that how do you communicate with them to try to get them to get the help and be compliant on medication? And what advice do you have for families trying to help their family members?
Yeah. That's very difficult. I just think you can never stop caring, and you can never stop hoping. And there's a lot of things, there's a lot of specific things that can be done. There's if a person is not compliant, there's community treatment orders. One of the things, although it's very difficult and it's not easy to do, I do think that if a person is suffering from a mental illness, that they should be independent, and they're an adult, of course. I believe that they should be independent from their family. They should have their own life. I lived in a group home for maybe 15 years. That was ideal for me. Um, it's not ideal for everybody. Not all group homes are the same. Um, if a person can get on some sort of provincial benefits to get themselves to live independently and work part-time, things like that. That's the ideal situation. One thing with families, it can be if a person's not on benefits, it can be very costly to get the medication they need. There are some things such as writing to a pharmaceutical company and just simply I don't know about the address or the names of the pharmaceutical companies, but say for example you're taking Depakine as a mood stabilizer. You find out who makes Depakine or who makes the uh, generic version of Depakine, and you can write to them and possibly get free medication through that. And there's a lot of options out there, and just really never give up, and never give up hoping. Um, yeah, there's so many things, and keep coming to things like cures, and keep coming to you can you go online and you can join the BC Schizophrenia Society, and they have information sessions. I think you can even join the Schizophrenia Society of Alberta, and they have information sessions. And the more you learn, the more you're going to be empowered to help a person.
I'm going to add to that. So, what this support group does is
Yeah.
education. I'm a firm believer to educate. One of the reasons that I am so passionate is that when my son was diagnosed, I could not get the help, and I went to every group possible.
Mm,
And I learned a lot, but there was not enough for someone with lived experience, a family member going through it, that I needed more information for myself and my
yeah.
family. So this is how I'm running this group. And it's interesting because I'm going to be sending a number of lectures that are going to be that are coming up through Caress Foundation, through the British Columbia, and I'm going to end up going on the Edmonton site. But there's brain and behavior, there's NAMI, there's a number of groups, and I'm proud to say that I just am going to be taking the training for family to family NAMI course, and I'm bringing it to York Region. And it's one of the best programs in the United States, and there are some in Ontario.
Mhm.
But this is the best program around
Yeah.
to help families understand mental illness,
Yeah.
and learning, wonderful ways to communicate and to help family members in crisis and a number of other topics.
There's a program called the Wellness Recovery Action Plan,
Yes.
and it's not necessarily for people with mental health issues. It can be for people with addictions. But I took their course, and they actually, the cool thing is you can take their course and you can take an advanced course, and then you can teach the course and be paid to teach the course or facilitate the course, I guess you would say. Um, the great thing about the Wellness Recovery Action Plan is you set out and you write down things like what are your triggers, what triggers you to experience mental illness symptoms, and you figure out, your own your own way of reacting to things, and then you can write down what you can do initially to deal with them. Maybe I could have a hot chocolate. Maybe I could go for a walk. Maybe I could, walk the dog, whatever, go to the playground and just swing on the swings for a little while and get my energy out. Um, and then it goes to different levels, and it can say, okay, well, if you need to go to the hospital, who do you want to take care of your affairs? And you name, maybe a sister, a parent. And then you say what doctor do you want? What hospital do you want to go to? What treatments do you not want? What treatments do you definitely want? And it really allows the person to take control of their situation. And I think taking that course was one of the turning points in my growth.
I agree with you because I've done the WRAP program, I've done the family WRAP program. And so what
Oh,
I sometimes bring into these sessions is some of the material. And I have families have a crisis plan, but also have on their phones, um, you know, as much information about their family members, names, address, telephone numbers, their supports, who are their supporters, what medications they're on, what hospitals they've been in,
mm,
and where they would like to go, what hospitals, what type of medications they do want and what they don't want.
yeah.
And I have a template that I share with people,
Oh yeah.
because
There's even
you
a
never know when someone's going to all of a sudden you can get delusions or psychosis.
yeah.
And I've had many families, and including myself, that our family members have gone missing. And it's a great tool just to have in our back pocket, just to give to the police or the ACT team or whatever to say,
Yeah.
please help me in finding my family member or
Yeah.
to
And
get them in the
there's
hospital.
even a rap app where you can download an app and it you can fill in all your stuff on your phone.
What are your thoughts on organizations that specialize in getting people off of their medication?
I actually feel very apprehensive when I hear about agencies like this that talk about not taking medication. Now the thing is, you can divide the population of people with schizophrenia usually into about four groups. There's 1/4 of them will have one episode of psychosis and never have one again. And they may not need medication, and that's great. That's wonderful. But the vast majority, 75%, the next quarter will have an episode and they'll do well with medication. The next quarter will have an episode and it'll take time for them to adjust and they'll end up doing well eventually. And then there's the last quarter who will need medication and possibly some sort of supported living or hospitalization for the rest of their life. I really honestly believe that you have to listen to the trained psychiatrists, and they're going to be big promoters of medication, and they're the ones that really take the schooling and the knowledge and everything. And I really don't agree with some of these places that say, you can go off medication, you don't need hospitals or anything like that. It just to me it seems like a recipe for disaster.
I'm going to ask, what what do you suggest us to do if our loved one has a great distrust in the police, doctors, and nurses? And now I understand that she's trying to get her son help, and she has roadblocks. He doesn't believe he's sick, and it's hard for her to go to the hospital. For instance, one of the things she's experienced is that he was in a hospital, but they wanted to transfer him to another hospital, and he would not go, so they discharged him. So, what can you tell Amanda?
This is a very difficult situation, probably one of the hardest to deal with. Um, when a person is reluctant to get treatment and they have what we call anosognosia, um, it sometimes can take quite a while for them to be convinced that they're going to need treatment and that their lives will be much better with treatment. But you just have to keep focusing on that and somehow, when they do get treatment, just say, well, okay, now you've been taking your medications for a few weeks, you're in the hospital, whatever. Do you really think you're better off now than when um you were wandering the streets and you didn't know where to go and you were worried and scared and all these things? And you sort of just have to keep having these heart-to-heart talks with a person about, I know it's difficult with medication. Another thing that I think can be really beneficial, the Cura's website, I'm not sure about this, but I believe they have a mentorship program where they can try to link someone from the advisory panel with the person so they can sort of counsel them and talk to them and say, well, yeah, I went through that. I experienced psychosis. I was off my medication. You look at Bethany's story, you read her story, and it took years for her parents to finally get her some proper treatment, and that's the really unfortunate thing. And you just have to not give up. And yeah, and of course there is, as Joni mentioned, there is such things as community treatment orders, where uh, you I don't know if you have to get guardianship of a person, but sometimes it becomes necessary to get guardianship of a person to get them help. And so these community treatment orders, a judge will actually decide that the person needs medication, and they have to show up, say every 2 weeks, for example, to get their injection of the medication in a time release shot. And if they don't show up, the police will go out and find them and either bring them to the hospital or bring them to get their shot, or take them to the hospital for treatment if they won't get their shot. And yeah, these are extreme circumstances. You don't always want to resort to them, especially if the person has a lot of anxiety. Um, I think sort of one of the beginnings of trying to reduce a person's anxiety is to encourage them to go to support groups where other people have who have mental illnesses convene and talk over these things, and then possibly they can make friends, and they can get somebody to give them advice, like, once again, I've been through this, I've experienced this, I didn't succeed until I started taking medication. And yeah, that's there's a lot online that you can do that, but there should be, in your area, there should be some resources in person. um I don't know, through different agencies, CAMH or something like that.
I know that there's some other people on the phone lines that are writing in, and most of them are saying, I can't get my son or daughter help because they don't recognize that they need help.
Yeah.
And that when the police come, or if they're admitted on a 72 hours, they can pull it together and they can pull it together and look well, and they can answer the questions. And so they're discharged, after 72 hours, and they never get probably a full assessment. So there's one person right now who's gone into the hospital 14 times. It's been a 72 hour, and they've been discharged, and they're very sick. And we're resorting now to having lawyers write some letters to say, this person needs help. Please don't send him to the same hospital. He needs to be hospitalized in a different area. Let's say CAMH if they were up in, let's say, North York. And please get them help, because this poor person is so sick and they're not getting the help that they need. And they appear quite well when they're in front of a psychiatrist or in the ER. They can hold it together because they've done it so many times that they know the routine. So what do you tell that parent? How do they get their family member help?
I think it's an excellent idea that you're getting a lawyer to write something for you. This is tricky, and this is not always the best thing, but I have run this by a doctor, and he has said it's not really that bad of an idea in the end. But if you could somehow record a person when they're delusional and having problems and paranoid and all these sort of things, if you hit the record button on your cell phone or something like that, and talk to them, and then play it back for them at another time when they're more lucid, and say, you're displaying this problem. But another thing is, to communicate with their doctor. And sometimes, like, well, I can see how needing a lawyer, sorry, I can see how needing a lawyer would be necessary. But something I would suggest is just writing a long, heartfelt letter to their doctor and explaining he's 14 times this person has done this. No person who doesn't have some sort of issue gets admitted to hospital 14 times under 72-hour certificates. Give him some treatment. Don't let him go. And explain the symptoms they're having, explain what they're going through. And it's the sad thing is it's not always going to work, and sometimes a person goes through these things, but you just have to keep at the person and explaining, you do so much better on medication. You do so much better when, your life doesn't have to be like this. You don't have to keep going in and out of hospital.
Do you think it was medication that helped you gain insight into your illness, be compliant, and move forward with your life?
Well, medication was one thing. Another thing was, there was somebody I really cared about who I wanted to get my life in order for. Unfortunately, that didn't work out as a relationship. Um, I think without medication, there would have been very little insight. Um, I had some insight. I knew I was tired of being ill. I knew I was tired of living marginalized, all those things. I got on medication for a time. I was having a hard time letting go of my delusional thoughts. Of course, you think you're whatever, you think you're super wealthy, or that or that a movie star is in love with you, or somebody's trying to recruit you for, to be the next CEO of Epcor or some company like that. And you have all these false ideas, and I had a hard time letting go of them. But over time, as I was on the medication and I lived a more normal life, some of the delusions didn't go away for quite a while. But with time, there was so much improvement in my mental state, and I let go of the delusional thoughts. And now I'm I'm really pretty much normal. Like, I remember having a friend say, "You're the most normal person I know."
Hmm.
And there were times when I was anything but normal.
I've read Dr. Amador's book, I Am Not Sick, I Don't Need Help. I've tried all the strategies to get my son with anosognosia to communicate with me, but it's not working. Do you have any advice?
One of the things that was very beneficial for me was, um, well, there's this one support group for people with bipolar disorder back when I was only diagnosed with bipolar disorder. My diagnosis, of course, changed to schizoaffective. Um, as I was more honest with my doctors about what was going on. So when I had just the diagnosis of bipolar disorder, I went to some support groups. Those were helpful to a point, but it was very difficult because people seemed very hopeless, and very, the depression was rampant, of course, in those groups. But my dad used to look for groups to take me to, and he would take me to some of these groups. And I remember I would go, and I would learn things, and I would meet people, and it was beneficial. And I remember just wondering, like, I asked my parents, why are you going to this? And they said, well, we're going because of you. And I simply did not realize that they cared enough to want to educate me and educate themselves about my illness, and offer me some sort of hope. And I do know one person in Cures, I'm saying that wrong again, but one person on the Cures website was saying, what I do is I bribe my son with tobacco or with other things. And, you don't want your children to smoke, of course, but if they're smokers and they haven't got money, tobacco is going to be a really big thing for them. And you could buy them a pouch of tobacco or something and say, okay, if you come with me to this support group and you just sit and listen, you don't need to say anything, you don't need to do anything. Just come with me to the support group. I'll give you a pouch of tobacco and you can be on your way. And it can plant seeds and it can, it can, who knows, maybe they'll get used to it and they'll start to participate a little. And that's just one thing that I had heard about that I believe could be very helpful.
My son has a doctor that he doesn't like. I've been told that there's nothing the doctor can do for my son. I've been yelled at by this doctor as a parent trying to help. We're at a dead end. What do we do?
Well, I think unfortunately there are such things as bad doctors. I had a doctor when I was in the hospital for 6 months, and I honestly don't think I would have had to stay there for 6 months if I had a doctor who was more accepting and involved in my case. What had happened? Well, I'm not going to get into that too much, but when a person has experienced a doctor they're not working with, you can just say it's not working. I'd like to get another doctor. They might put you on a waiting list that's inordinately long. They might out of spite, they might try and give you a bad doctor. But one of the things I would suggest is get a hold of a psychiatric nurse or a counselor and ask them to suggest a doctor. And
I'm going to tell you right now, there's no
Yep.
doctors in Ontario, and
oh,
you're lucky to have a psychiatrist.
oh,
So,
I see.
and
Yeah,
since this person was at another hospital,
yeah. But
and
I think it's
they
just
they went to the patient relations and said, we need another doctor.
yeah.
And then the next day they got a letter saying that they were dismissed from the practice. So
Oh,
now they're without a doctor at this point.
that's terrible. It's unacceptable, really. But I believe a person should have a right to change doctors if they're not working well with their doctor. Um, I don't know. I don't know the best way. Now, technically, okay, the one thing I do know is a doctor should not yell at a person, but um, a doctor does have a reasonable grounds to say, well, that's privacy. The person has said they don't want to share that with you, but you should be able to communicate one way with the doctor without the doctor being able to tell you anything. And I'm a big believer in the written word. Write a letter, describe everything, explain what the child is going through, explain everything, why it's hurting you, what he's done, what the repeated hospitalizations, all those things, and send it to the doctor or give it to the doctor. But you should be able to communicate to them without them communicating back to you without permission. But of course, the ideal thing is to get the permission, and I don't know how expensive it is or how difficult it is. But if there's some way to get some kind of guardianship, I know right now with my brother, we contacted the Lord because my brother's condition is declining, and we don't know if he's going to be incapacitated and need someone to make decisions for him. We contacted the lawyer through the Alzheimer's Society. We don't know if he has Alzheimer's, but with this was just the lawyer. This was how we contacted the lawyer. But for $1,200, they're gonna write a legal will. They're gonna set up a guardianship in case he becomes incapacitated, and something else, a power of attorney, I believe, so that if he becomes incapacitated, we can handle his finances. And this requires the consent of my brother or, you know, in your case, the person who you'd be getting the guardianship of. But if you could somehow get that, I think that would help solve a lot of problems. And I don't know if you can get that.
Thank you very much. That's what the person just wrote back. That was helpful information. And it has been a very big problem trying to find the right psychiatrist. And so she will write that letter.
And once again, there was one other thing was I knew a woman, Calgary and Edmonton are about 300 kilometers apart. That's a 3-hour drive, of course. There was a woman I knew who had heard about the psychiatrist my mom was seeing, and I saw him for a brief time. His name doesn't matter. He's even passed away, but she had heard about him, and he was very well renowned, and he was he was an incredible doctor, basically. She lived in Calgary. He practiced in Edmonton. You generally only see a psychiatrist about every 3 months or so, once the person's stabilized and doing well. She went so far as to take a bus to Edmonton to see her psychiatrist every 3 months. And I don't know if the situation in other parts of Ontario are different or anything, but like, I don't know if you could get a doctor in a suburb or something like that, or, you know, a couple hours drive away. If it was easier to get a different doctor there, I have no idea, but I'm just wondering if that's helpful to mention.
That is helpful. We actually, a group of mothers, we are looking at alternatives for families because it's been very difficult. You can get a consult, sometimes at one consult, and then you don't have follow-up services. So you know, you can get an assessment, you'll may or may not get medication, and after that you go back to your family doctor, which family doctors do not want to.
Yeah.
They don't know how to administer the medication, and some of the medication they can't. So it's
Yeah.
a problem. But with
I
that,
don't want to sound like too much of an activist, but I really think that, you know, even I'm aware of the Ford government. My sister lives in Ontario, and I know how unreasonable they are, and there's a lot of things going on. I'm a firm believer that you can write to your Minister of Mental Health and Addiction, or whatever the equivalent is in Ontario, and just say this: my son is unable to get a doctor. We need to change. We need, you know, and if enough people show them that they're gonna raise a stink, they're gonna have to do something. So I don't know if that, yeah,
a lot of people are doing that already. That one lady
right.
has, let me see, 7,633 people on her petition that she is sending to the different ministers and cabinet people, MPs and MPPs.
Excellent.
And there's another campaign going from a woman in Guelph who has a son who cannot get help and is homeless and has been out of the hospital a number of times. So there are people now, there's a whole group of people now writing the government for change because
Yeah.
people cannot get help, and I'm part of that committee. So I just want to say that we've gone over time, and I'm sorry,
Oh, no problem.
but I want to say, Leif, thank you so much for your candid talk, for your, you know, telling us your story and filling us on how successful someone can be. And I'm going to send out your email, you know, how to get your books and your website. Please, you
My
know,
pleasure. And please, anyone who has any further questions, or, you know, for whatever reason, if they didn't want to ask them, or if they just wanted to contact me, please feel free to use that email.
someone else on this chat on my phone says it has been enlightening. I'm so hopeful for learning as much as I did tonight. And I feel with time and the right medication, my daughter will do well in the future. And one thing in parting, I'm going to say that the longer you're on medication, the brain heals. And so, you know, if you have not been on medication for a very, very long time or go on and off medication, it takes a longer time for the brain to heal.
And there's also a period of time it takes for the body to adapt to the medication. Like there was a number of side effects that I had. I don't know, for example, like my hands would shake, and I had a hard time drinking coffee. And so I sort of started to realize that if I drank coffee with two hands, it was a lot safer. I wouldn't spill on myself. And you learn, you adapt, you grow the longer you're on medication. And so I would encourage anyone who's being put on medication that can't stand the side effects, give it some time, and just stick with your course.
And also on that note, if you have side effects, I'm a firm believer to learn everything you know about the medication that you're on. And there is on the Krebs Foundation and Dr. Messamore, which I'll send information. You can ask a number of doctors, and I go on regularly to ask questions about medication side effects and learning a lot. And sometimes here in Canada, they are not optimizing the medication for the side effects. For instance, if weight gain in the US, they give metformin, Ozempic, and some of the other medications. When you go on antipsychotics here in Canada, they do not. Most people have gained 60 pounds or more, and then I have people advocate for those medications, as well as tardive dyskinesia. There are medications that you can go on, and there are clinics here. However, most psychiatrists do not advocate for that or tell the family members or patients that there are medications that can help control that, as doctors here are very concerned about the side effects, long-term side effects, where it seems like in the US, they've learned to figure out a ratio of how to control the medication and have less side effects. So learn as much as you can, and I will send some of these doctors that I regularly attend. Thank you so much, Leif. I'd love to have you again. Thank you so much.
I just have one last thing to mention.
Sure.
If you are having problems with housing for your loved one, I don't know how much it can help, but the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness is supposed to be able to reach out and help people in this situation. And they have a website, and you can go on there. You can contact as high up as the CEO. And I found them to be very, very helpful, very caring people. And I don't know how much that can help, but if you should be able to get some information from them about what avenues you can take or what resources there are, or something like that.
Well, thank you. And that's something I'm going to send right away to some people whose family members are about to be homeless or are homeless at this point. So thank you so much for that information. I wasn't aware of it. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in tonight. I hope you learned a lot. And thank you, Leif. And thank you, Billy, for recording this tonight. Have a good evening. Stay safe, and hope to see you again at our next speaker series. And Leif, please buy Leif's books. Look at his website. He's a very creative and enterprising man who I have been enjoying reading his blogs and reading some of his books. And I think you'll learn a lot too. Thank you so much, and have a good evening.
Thanks, Joni. You take care. Take care, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye for now.